Now we're going to be commencing today on page 100. Please open your books to 100. We're in chapter 7, Working with Others. And we're nearing the end of the chapter, which means that we have covered a lot of material in this chapter already. Let's remind ourselves what chapter 7 is all about. The title, Working with Others, gives us at least a clue. Most people think that chapter 7 is the whole story of the 12th step. It is not. It does not cover two parts of the 12th step. The 12th step is really broken into three parts. The first being this question of a spiritual awakening. And nowhere is the spiritual awakening defined in the 7th chapter or anywhere else. Nowhere is it repeated except one time in the 12th step. It never appears anywhere else in the book, because it was added after the book had been written by Bill. It was a change in the steps. It was something that was occasioned by a compromise in the editorial committee when they reviewed Bill's original manuscript. As a result of that, Bill had always talked about spiritual experience or spiritual experiences, and the editorial committee changes to spiritual awakening, but then nobody decided that they had to in some way describe what a spiritual awakening is. We've examined this ourselves, and we find that there are many, many clues in the big book. And when it talks about having a spiritual awakening as a result of working the steps, then we get our clues by looking at the steps. What do the steps show us? What do they promise us? What progress is reported to us as we go through the 12 steps? And so we know that the spiritual awakening has many parts to it, but taken together they constitute our coming close to our Creator, our establishing a bona fide relationship with God, and a complete change in our way of thinking and our way of conducting ourselves in life. We have therefore entered the world of the Spirit, we're told, and we've been restored to sanity. That's part of it. We have become God conscious. That's another part, conscious of the God within us. We developed a vital sixth sense, which means that we are able to be in some kind of communion with God. We can be inspired, or we can be intuitively instructed by Him. We have reached a place of surrender, and we're willing to find out what God wants us to do, and then to be obedient to His wishes. We have developed a fairly high degree of gratitude and humility and honesty, and we've had our defects of character removed, and most importantly is that we have grown close to God. Now, the 12th step is part of the trilogy of steps, 10, 11, and 12, by which we stay close to Him. Remember the promise in the third step, that God will give us everything we need, but we must stay close to Him and perform His work well. So, chapter 7 and the 12th step also address this question of performing His work well. The second part of the 12th step is to carry this message, and the chapter 7 addresses carrying the message, at least in part. Now keep in mind, there were no sponsors as such when the book was written. And this chapter 7 spends a great deal of time, at least half the chapter, examining how do you work with a brand new person. And we've been through that in some detail, the things that we must do in order to get them started and to reach the point where they're ready to begin working the steps. And the third part of the 12th step is not discussed at all, not in its real context. That is to practice these principles in all of our affairs. A lot of people get up to the podium and like to play around with the word practice as if it's something like practicing piano lessons. That does not what it mean at all. It has the same meaning as for a doctor, that a doctor practices his medicine, practices his profession. That means that he engages in working with his patients and following the dictates of his professional training and the rules of the profession. In the same way with us, we practice these principles in all of our affairs, means that we have already learned how to use the tools of the program, and now we're expected to put them to use in everyday life as we go through our lives. Practicing the principles means working the steps. The principles are the steps, and the steps are the principles. So the 12th step admonishes us that in every part of our lives we are to put the steps to use, to practice these principles in all of our affairs. When we do that, we stay spiritually fit. When we don't do that, we go off the deep end again. And we were also admonished right at the end of the 11th step that we are undisciplined people, and we have to let God discipline us in the way that's been outlined. So when we get into chapter 7, we need to remember that it has some limitations. It does not attempt to exhaustively review the problems that we find as sponsors, or even to give us that much in the way of instructions. What it does, however, is to set out certain basic parameters which run absolutely contrary to popular wisdom around the rooms. New AJA has come up with a whole bunch of stuff which is popularly believed to be true, which is directly contrary to the Big Book. And so we get to see some of that as we finish up with chapter 7. It also, chapter 7 on page 100, strangely enough, does, without mentioning what it's talking about, it does give us in one sentence, the entire substance of sponsorship. Now, it's important to know that they weren't thinking in terms of sponsorship as we know it today when the Big Book was written. As a matter of fact, the earliest reference to sponsorship which I can find in the literature didn't come until 1947. And this is in an article that was written by Bill in that year. And here's what he says: more and more AA groups are adopting the idea of sponsorship. Each newcomer is assigned a reasonably stable AA member whose ward he becomes during his brief period of introduction to our way of life. The sponsor helps make hospital arrangements, takes his man there, visits him frequently, sees that he is visited by other AAs whose experience might be especially helpful. Hence, a prospect so handled has received a powerful shot of AA and a good preview of our society, what our society is like, before he ever goes to a meeting. Bill was, of course, was very adamant about this idea that new people ought to be hospitalized, that he had been in the hospital, in Towns Hospital, 3 times, and the last time he went, he voluntarily checked himself in because he was afraid he was going to slip into delirium tremens or have a seizure. And so he knew he needed to be detoxed, and that was why he was there. And he believed that this was something which ought to be done for everybody. Well, when the Big Book was written, there were no detox centers as we know them now. There were no treatment centers as we know them now. There were a few hospitals which would take somebody in, especially if they were in extremis, they might take them in overnight. And then there were some expensive places, drying out hospitals, which really were only for those who could afford it. There wasn't any generalized system of detoxification. Nevertheless, that was Bill's experience, and he felt that we ought to always push for there to be more and more in the way of detox. One of the things that happened was that there were a number around the country, especially in the larger metropolitan areas, there were clubs formed, which most of them call themselves an Alano Club, and they were open 24 hours a day. Now they're still around. I don't know of any in South Florida, but if you go into some of the other cities, especially on the West Coast or in Nevada or in Arizona, you will find Alano clubs open 24 hours, and they got couches and maybe a fold-out bed or something, and they take people in, and somebody sits with them 24/7, lets them shake it out. Or if they see that somebody's really gonna go sour on them, they try to transport them to a hospital or call an ambulance. Well, that was where shaking it out really got started in AA, was in people's homes, or they began to form these clubs and have volunteers be there. And if you've ever done that, Karen.
What is the origin of the word Alano? What is that? Is that an acronym?
Well, there's a takeoff on no alcohol, I think, or Al-Anon, Alano, no alcohol. I'm not sure. You know, we come up with these crazy things like that. I'm not sure. It may be an acronym for something. But I remember when I was 14 years sober, I'd gone broke in Atlanta, and I was hitchhiking my way to the coast. I was going to cop out to my kids. I got as far as Las Vegas, and I was broke. And I went across the street from Jerry's Casino on North Las Vegas Boulevard to use a telephone. I was going to call California Collect and have somebody come and get me. And poor me, you know. I knew well enough by that time what I was doing to myself. But when I got over to the telephone booth, it was standing out on the street corner or street side of the street. And there was I was hungry, and there was a half-filled container of root beer float in there. It was hot, of course. This was the middle of July, and in Vegas that's about 115 degrees. But I drank that stuff down because I was really hungry. And then I heard some pool balls clicking behind me, and there was a blacked-out window there. There were three storefronts. And on my left over here was a nudie bar. In the middle was a blacked out window and with pool balls clicking behind it, and on the right was a pawn shop. It was a real good neighborhood. And I turned around, and down in the corner of this blacked out window was the word about this long, Alano Club. And I said, "Oh God, thank you, I'm home." So I went in and got to a meeting, and next thing I knew, I was in a three-quarter-way house, halfway out, I don't know what you'd call it. This guy had a 4-bedroom house. He had 35 men in it. And I was hungry, but so they fed me dinner. There was board and room there. And the guy's name was Dewey. And Dewey said, "I don't have a bed or a couch for you." He said, "If you go across the street, there's a parking lot over there, you can go sleep in a car." So I went over there, and it got down to about 105, I guess, and it was kind of a dusty parking lot, and I was trying to sleep in the back of this car, and there was this old yellow dog that was wandering around in this parking lot, and at midnight it became my birthday, my belly button birthday, and it was July 19th. And me and old yellow dog, we got as much sleep as we could. And the next morning, I got up and I walked across the street, and they fed me breakfast. And I noticed as I came into the house that the lawn was pretty shaggy, so I finished breakfast, grabbed the lawnmower, and cut the lawn. And that kind of impressed Dewey. And so then they fed me lunch. That afternoon, one of the air conditioners blew out or iced up, and in Vegas, forget it. So I went up on the roof and chipped the ice off and got that going, so I got to eat dinner. And that night, one of the guys didn't come home, so I got to sleep on the couch. And that same night, I met some people down at the Alano Club. One of the guys said, "Do you want to go to work?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Meet me at meet me at the bus at 2:30." And I said, "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow afternoon." He said, "No, I mean tomorrow morning, 2:30." I said, "What am I going to be doing?" He said, "Oh, it's a sales job." So, remember, I'm 14 years sober now, and in fact, I had just sold my house in Atlanta, my limousine, fired my chauffeur, and my blonde girlfriend, who was going to love me forever, had run off with the judge that we knew. So I was feeling pretty sorry for myself. And anyway, I got up and I got out the bus, and we ended up down across from, getting off at the Stardust Casino and walking off across this vacant lot through all these prickly plants and everything, and across over in a residential section, and we got to this kind of a warehouse place. And I kept asking, "What am I going to be doing?" He said, "Don't worry, you'll find out." So I walked in at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was a telemarketing operation selling ballpoint pens with your name on them, like this. See, this one says Edith Macy Conference Center, right? Now, we were selling these pens. Of course, they had a cap on them for $1.29 a piece. A ballpoint pen with your name on it, but we were giving away a diamond necklace. Now, if you go out into the hinterlands of this great country, you will find a mooch under every shade tree, believe me. And some of these, I didn't know it then, but some of these people will buy anything that you want to send them, because they always figure they're going to get that big prize. They don't buy the pens. They got a garage full of this stuff. So I said, "Well, okay, so what do I do?" And the guy gave me 5 phone books, said, "Start calling the East Coast. And here's the pitch. You just read the pitch and sell this stuff." So, oh, God. I remember I picked up the phone. It was about 4:15 in the morning, and it was 7:15 in Maine. I think I was calling. Some guy had a nursery up there, and I said, "Is the owner there?" And the lady said, "Oh, yeah, he's out and back. I'll get him." I was sitting there saying, "He's going to be really pissed at me." She's calling him from the back, and I'm going to try to sell him some pens and send him a diamond necklace. So anyway, it turned out okay. I made the sale. And I couldn't believe it. Of course, this was quite a place. This place, you would have to be there to believe it. They had these telephone girls who actually did the dialing, and then the hotshot salesman would pick it up, after she got the owner on the phone. And these gals, most of them had come in off the street. They were still in uniform. They had tattoos on their breasts, and they had their working clothes on. So this is the way they supplemented their income. And then, if you've heard of spiffs, this is a little bonus that you give out. Well, in that company, in those days, if you made a especially big sale, they spiffed you with a line of Coke. And you just go, they had it all spread out on the table there, and you could go snip up a line. And then these people were walking around with a marijuana pipe sticking out of their pockets and a bottle of 10 High in the back pocket, standing up on their desks and baying like dogs, crawling around the floor. This is all while they're doing their pitch. Oh yeah. I thought I'd died and gone to Bedlam. First week I made $800 selling those stupid pens, and the next week I made a whole bunch more. And the third week, some guy pulled in the parking lot, and I was about to leave and go over and get a free, a cheap buffet dinner downtown. He says, "Psst, psst." He was driving a big fancy sports car. So I got in, and he said, "Hey, you want to go to Miami?" I said, "Yeah, what do you got in mind here, fella, He said, "I want you to run my room down there." I said, "Oh, yeah?" He says, "How much you got coming this week?" I said, "About $1,000, I think." He said, "Okay, here's $1,000. Here's a one-way first-class ticket, and I have a apartment with 2 months rent paid. You get a brand new car. Get on the airplane tomorrow, go to Miami, and be my room manager." I said, "Yes, sir." So that's how I got to Miami. Never looked back. I learned that business. I had 4 telemarketing companies of my own at one time. Not all at once. But I'll never forget that diamond necklace. That was really the kick. Because we'd tell the guy, sit down, John. What I'm going to tell you is just going to knock your socks off. John, are you married? Yeah, I'm married. John, does your wife like diamonds? You had to talk like kind of a hillbilly, you know. Does your wife like diamonds? Yeah, she do. Well, I tell you what I got coming out to you, John. I got coming out to you is a 1/2 carat, and then you had to say uncut, but you had to swallow the word. Uncut diamond necklace. Now, an uncut diamond, if you've never seen one, looks like a freeze-dried piece of pigeon shit. I mean, it is just a little pebble, right? On a 24 karat gold-plated chain. So now that chain had a guarantee with it, an absolute guarantee. You could send it back, get your money back if it didn't turn your wife's neck green in 3 days. And all it's going to cost you, John, you don't have to pay for a thing. I'm going to send this out to you, but you do have to take some of my wonderful ballpoint pens with your name on them. Now, John, how do you want that name to read? Compliments of John's Pharmacy? Yeah, I guess so. What color do you want, John? Pretty soon the poor guy's already signed up. Amazing. Oh, well, anyway, I don't know how I got off on that.
Step, probably.
Oh, you guys, you do a wonderful fifth step, guys. Would you like me to go on? I can count on your discretion, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So anyway, this whole business of sponsorship was not something which they created back in the early days. It's something that kind of sprung out of practice. But if we look at the antecedents of sponsorship, what do we find? We go right back to the very beginnings. Here's the way we look at it. You remember Roland Hazard, Roland H. He's the guy that went and spent a year with Dr. Young, trying to get squared away so he'd stop drinking. He had mucho money, a big job, wonderful family, had everything going for him, but he was a drunk. And he spent a year in Switzerland with Dr. Young. Dr. Young thought had him all squared away. And Roland came back over here, got drunk almost immediately, went back to see Dr. Young, and Carl said to him, Roland, there's nothing I can do for you. You're a chronic alcoholic, and alcoholics of your type I cannot help. You're going to have a complete psychic change, a spiritual experience, spiritual awakening of some kind. And I've seen a few people recover from that, but I can't give it to you. So Roland came back and he got hooked up with the Oxford people, and sure enough, that was the answer. Roland knew Ebby's father, and Ebby's father let him know that Ebby was about to be committed for life to an insane asylum because he was a dipsomaniac, a hopeless, helpless, insane drunk. Roland went and got the judge to parole Ebby into his care. Roland became Ebby's sponsor. So we can trace our sponsorship clear back that. Now you notice that it was Roland and Ebby, one on one. 2 months later, Ebby went to Bill's apartment and brought the message to Bill. Then, if we read Bill's story, we see Ebby working with Bill, one-on-one. Then Bill tried for 6 months and finally ended up in Akron, and he went to Dr. Bob's house, one-on-one. Worked with Dr. Bob, and Dr. Bob got just a second, David. Dr. Bob got sober, and the two of them went to the hospital and both worked with Bill Dodson, AA number 3, Bill D, and later Dodson and Dr. Bob worked together one-on-one. Yes, David?
You hear a lot around the rooms this thought about when you make a 12-step call, I'm not talking about sponsorship, but a 12-step call, you go with another person. We know that Bill did go with Dr. Bob to get Bill Dobson. It's also said that Roland Hazard, he had this other guy, Zeber, with him when he went to and to the judge to try to get Eddie help. Of course, Bill was pretty much by himself, but that these 12-step calls are made with a second person. You have a thought or an opinion about that?
Oh, yeah. A lady in the bottom line got me in a corner over that on Thursday night. And,
Kathy?
it was Audrey. So, let's turn to page 102 just quickly and see what the big book has to say about this. The second full paragraph, it's more than 2/3 that way down the bottom of the page. Your job now is to be at the place where you may be of maximum helpfulness to others, so never hesitate to go anywhere if you can be helpful. You should not hesitate to visit the most sordid spot on earth on such an errand. Keep on the firing line of life with these motives, and God will keep you unharmed. Now, whether we go singly or in pairs or 3 or 4 people, which is not recommended at all, if we pander to the fear, we'll always want somebody there with us to share in the danger that we perceive. Otherwise, what would be the point? It is team sponsorship, David, is only valid and only works where the 2 sponsors utterly agree on the program and what ought to be done. Now, I was fortunate because Father Joe and Admiral Bud Scholes were of like mind on everything. They'd both been taught by the same teachers. And so there was never any mixed messages, and there was no jealousy, there was no pushing and tugging. But I can promise you that team sponsorship, more than one person, these days could turn out to be an utter disaster for the newcomer. And so the idea that there has to be 2 people really revolves around pandering to fear, that somehow or another it's going to be a dangerous thing to be there. Well, maybe so, but so what? That's exactly what the book is telling us. There's a lady, some of you may have met her. 7 years ago, I got a call from her. She was in a house of prostitution on 79th Street, a shooting gallery, being run by the local hoodlums. And they were a very strong gang, very violent gang. And she asked for help. Now, this doesn't make me any kind of a hero, but I believe what this tells me. If I'm going there with that motive, I'm going to be all right. I went down to that place, walked in, and told the head pimp there that I was taking this lady out. And he didn't say a word. I took her out 7 years ago. She's sober today with a husband, 2 children, just finishing up her education to be a teacher. Now, I would say to you this, if I was so chicken and I had so little faith that I would be unwilling to go to that place to take her out, I don't know what would have happened. My guess is that she would have died there. And all those people's lives that have been touched since then would all been different, wouldn't it? That's why the big book admonishes us, go do it. Sure, if you can get somebody to go with you who's of like mind, is not going to cross you up on everything you say, or who doesn't want to monopolize and do let's say you've got somebody to go with you who is spiritually arrogant and is going to start preaching. That's the last thing you want with somebody new. So sure, do it, but be careful who you take. But never be afraid to go on your own. Never. You trusting God or you're not. So many of these things they sound right, and yet they're just dead wrong. And there's a whole bunch more that we're going to find out as we go along. Does that an answer your question?
Yes, I would ask you again, in your early sobriety, did your sponsor or others take you on 12-step calls to maybe just break you in or to train you or teach you?
Yeah, I got one of those 3 days after I was sober. I got to sit in the corner and watch these guys work. But see, Joe and Bud worked as a team, and they were a perfect team. I've seen very few in 38 years who could do that. I've only worked one time in tandem with another person as a sponsor. It worked out well, but he was somebody I sponsored and I trained, and so we thought the same and we worked well together. But we also we were also in daily contact with each other, so it was not the kind of thing where you're trying to coordinate among three different people. So there's a lot of practicality involved here, but the question is, that's not the question here. The question is, what would you do if you weren't afraid? Would you go to the most sordid spot on earth if you weren't afraid? Would you walk in no matter what the circumstances were, trusting that God will keep you safe? I do. That's it. Yeah.
Jim, I think the danger that people talk about in the rooms is the danger of having a drink, of it getting to them and them going, trying to help somebody and end up drinking or drugging. That's what I think, and that goes back to fear too.
Holy cow, you can't be serious. I guess you are. Let's go on page 101. This is right in line with what we're studying today. You got your book there?
No, I forgot.
Oh, okay. Well, page 101, second paragraph. In our belief, any scheme of combating alcoholism which proposes to shield the sick man from temptation is doomed to failure. If the alcoholic tries to shield himself, he may succeed for a time, but he usually winds up with a bigger explosion than ever. We've tried these methods. These attempts to do the impossible have always failed. Our rule is not to avoid a place where there is drinking if we have a legitimate reason for being there. And what more legitimate reason could you have than to be there to save somebody's life? It just is not a factor for anybody who is spiritually fit, because the problem has been removed. Remember back on page 85 what it told us? We've been restored to sanity. The problem's been removed. It doesn't exist for us. And that's the way we remain so long as we remain spiritually fit. That's why these things this is all pandering to fear. And we mustn't do that. But we've got to deal with this free of fear and based upon faith. And if we don't, we're really out to lunch. Make sense?
Yeah.
You recognize the fear, though, and then you go anyway.
Well, of course. I mean, it doesn't say to be blind to danger.
Right.
We don't have to be stupid about it.
No.
But on the other hand,
to get her, right? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I hope so. We might have to borrow you forever, Yes.
I'm Rosemary, my great papa book. I can share two off the top of my head experiences. One was 3. I remember I was going down to speak at a meeting in Broward, and as we were sitting at the stoplight, I looked over and I saw there was this in the back part of Broward somewhere, and I looked over and there was this bus going on, and these people, it was like right out my window, they're with the guns, they're surrounding the guy. I'm like, should I duck? I'm going down here to speak at this meeting. This isn't where I, normally hang out. And all of a sudden I remembered reading what it said in the big book, because I was getting really fearful and really anxiety-ridden, and I thought, what am I doing here? My mother would have a fit, I'm in AA. I'm not supposed to be around this kind of atmosphere. I'm sober, for God's sake. What am I doing, within a stone's throw of all this going on around me? So, and I'm going there, sober. So anyways, I thought about what it said in the big book, and I calmed down. Then years later, well, not years later, but then I look back and I realized I took a meeting into state hospital, and this was not just people that were just alcoholics. I mean, they had severe mental problems too. And I realized they used to shut the door on us. It was me and whoever I brought in to speak, and there'd be like 5 men, and the door was locked, and I didn't know it. And so I looked back on that and I went, oh my God. It was like the last meeting when my commitment was up and I knew that the door was locked. And I went, okay, and I thought of that paragraph again. Thank God I didn't go through the whole year with that anxiety. I don't know if I would have kept coming back. But I found that out later. And then I can think of the time I say, me, God, my cellular phone. I picked someone up from Hollywood in a homeless shelter and drove them drunk all the way up to West Palm to the treatment center up there, the city, county, whatever it is, and checked them in up there. I did have an automatic door lock, and they were drunk. They were totally loaded. So I just said, all I have to do is pull off the side of the road if I have to, or whatever, take the next exit, or whatever. And I prayed, and God just kind of gave me the wisdom and strength of whatever to do that. So, when I read the big book, I take it literally. I don't make up, I can't go into a bar room because I can't go into a bar room and pick up a drink. It says if we have a good reason for being there, alcohol's everywhere and it's legal. What are you going to do? I can't go in there? It's legal? If I still have an alcoholic mind, then I have no business being in there.
Well, if you have an alcoholic mind, you're going to drink anyway. You don't have to go into a bar to be tempted.
Well, right. That's what I'm saying. You don't have to have it in your house. I don't keep it in my house because I don't have any reason to have it there because I'm an alcoholic. But if people come over and bring alcohol or something, that's their business. They bring it over. Or I'll buy it for them, but I'm not going to keep it in my house when they're not there.
Right.
Because I am an alcoholic.
Yeah, well, you've been doing this for a long time, too, so you've been there. But it's a very good point that David brought up because it's just another one of those shibboleths that floats around here that have no basis in fact. And as a matter of fact, if you want to look at most of the cautionary mythology which is rampant in our treatment centers and some of our groups today, you'll find every single bit of it is fear-based. It's all pandering to fear. And it's just exactly the opposite of how we need to be. And every time we give in to fear, we're given into the devil. If there is a devil, his name is fear. Fear is our only enemy. Fear is what has warped and perverted and smashed us, and we've been spending a whole lot of time getting rid of it with God's help. So every time we find ourselves acting out of fear, we have to pull ourselves up short and say, whoa, wait a second. I'm insulting God because I'm saying, I don't trust you. And for us, that's deadly.